There are timestamps down in the description box below in case you want to skip to certain parts of this video. Also, be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel in case you want to see more videos like this, because it definitely helps me out a lot, and apparently a lot of the people who watch these type of videos aren't necessarily subscribed to my channel. And last thing to add in is that I have two different types of clothing while doing this video because I read some negative reviews ahead of time and also got back from the theater and read some more negative reviews. So, just in case you're wondering why I have different clothes on, that's the reason why. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started looking at all of the negative reviews for the movie Black Widow. A lethargic, clunky, and overlong bore that's low on thrill, suspense, and What is this rating here? That is insane. The film's truer purpose seems to serve as a setup for the next Black Widow character, Fuse Yelena Belova, I might say that wrong, who'll be taking over the franchise, but that could have been done in many ways other than this approach. Black Widow doesn't even feel like any kind of final send-off or a way to complete her story arc. I have a feeling that this one right here might be wrong because I saw the action in the trailers and the action looks really promising. So I'm hoping that what this dude said over here is incorrect. But these other two, it looks like that the movie itself doesn't really do great or that much justice for the character of Black Widow, but it does justice for the side characters. There could be a possibility that Black Widow is done like satisfying enough, but not necessarily to the point where it's like, okay, her story arc is finished. I'm not that upset that she died in Endgame. Black Widow mixes great action with a tedious script, predictable plot, and overly long runtime. The results are mixed. These two right here are definitely not new things that I heard from any other critic that has something critical to say about the MCU. Love Florence Pugh, love David Harbour, but Captain America the Winter Soldier is a better Black Widow movie than the actual Black Widow movie. Dang. This is from Jeremy Jahns. I don't know if this is necessarily going to be like a rotten review or like a negative review on the movie, because Rotten Tomatoes does have the tendency of like manipulating people's words and saying that it's actually a thumbs down rather than a thumbs up, even though some of the reviews would say that they actually give it a thumbs up. But this right here, it still doesn't really send off that many good signs towards the film. And Chris Stuckmann is also on here. This film could have been great. It could have been so much better than it is. But they just kind of made a contractual movie that feels like a placeholder for other things in the future. That's actually the problem that the DC universe had at the very beginning, kind of like with Batman v Superman, in my opinion. They pretty much had these characters in here and set up these motivations for the next movies rather than actually having this movie just do its own thing right then and there at that moment. Black Widow is the manifestation of the sunk cost fallacy. There ought to be support groups, same as it ever was. Watching Black Widow play out, you feel a bit like a school teacher watching an underperforming student. Marvel, you're so much better than this. Natasha remains the paper-thin sketch of character she always was, relegated to a posthumous backdoor pilot of a send-off, leaving us hoping they can get it right the next time. So what I'm seeing throughout these reviews is that the way that they portray Natasha in here is not really that bad. They could have done it better, but it's still acting like as if she's a secondary character, even though the secondary character that they have in the other films pretty much introduce her as a more fleshed out character, which I can understand. It's kind of hard to transition a secondary character over and make them the main lead character when them as the side character was a lot more fascinating rather than seeing their actual life story, and it turns out, oh, it's not as fascinating as I thought it would be. After a strong first half, the movie gets derailed by its real villain, a poor, tonally off script. Black Widow doesn't find the right way to tell one of the MCU's most serious stories to date. After an entire year of no Marvel movies on the big screen, it's difficult not to recommend this as worthy escapist popcorn fun. Great girl power and the family dynamics and dramatic scenes stand out, but the action and thriller bits blend together into an unmemorable montage. So focused on using disability and trauma as plot devices, the filmmakers never plumb the depths of what it is to lack agency. it looks like the screenplay aspects of the MCU is starting to go downhill a little bit. Like Spider-Man Far From Home, people say that some of Peter Parker's story arcs wasn't necessarily that great when he was talking to Mysterio. There's also a lot of subplots in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and people got confused on what that movie is about. And one of the major problems in this one, from what I'm seeing with a bunch of the other critics that are saying that this movie is a downgrade, is that the storytelling or the writing in here is not that good either. I more so get into Marvel movies mostly because of the characters and their journeys. The story arcs does come into contact with the storytelling, so I can understand some people getting like frustrated. Like, I definitely understand more so on why people are frustrated with Spider-Man Far From Home. But even with those problems, I still gratefully enjoy that movie. So I'm hoping that I can say the same for Black Widow. The year's too late solo flick for Scarlett Johansson's MCU superhero is both too much of a glorified backdoor pilot for its co-star and not up to par with the spy films and espionage thrillers it wishes to emulate. Some people would probably say that this movie is a little too late, but I would say it's better late than never. I'm kind of glad that we still have it rather than not having it. Like the young Natasha herself, Black Widow feels as though it's been programmed into submission and scarcely allowed to live and breathe before it's suddenly over. The stakes are non-existent no matter how many times a bad guy or girl aims a gun at our beloved heroine. We know she has a specific endgame. Marvel returns to cinemas, and its first film back is a bit lackluster. This feels 10 years too late, not just for the character, but for this type of bland action film. Black Widow falls victim to the big bombast characteristic of the studio. The result is a disappointing solo movie that ends up burying Natasha Romanoff once again. Okay, some of them are still saying the exact same thing all over again, that it's not really putting in a lot of stakes, the screenplay writing, a lot of stuff that I've heard about criticizing the MCU, not just on Black Widow. And for the most part, with what I'm seeing on day one, is that the screenplay writing has problems. They don't feel like that it was worth seeing Black Widow in here. They feel like that she's not really being played into that much. I feel like the family in here is being played into a good bit, but they're more so motivations for the next film, which is mostly what I'm seeing here when I'm looking at the negative reviews. So that's it for day one. I am going to wait until I see day two of the negative reviews until next time. So let's go ahead and transition into that one. So I just got back from seeing Black Widow at the movie theater, and I personally dug it. I thought that this was a very fun MCU movie. Not in one of my top 10 favorite MCU films, but I think it might be in my top 15 because I like the darker edge that it had in here. I like that it explores some of the psychological analysis of what Natasha went through when she was back at her own hometown. I love the family dynamics, and I love seeing all of the other characters in here. I can understand when people say that the side characters probably shine a lot more than Black Widow does. I think that what the movie was missing a little bit was some of the identity of what did Natasha do when she was over here that made her like this place, that made her feel like that she was at home. But there is some necessity here in order to understand the difference of how she feels when she's with the Avengers and how she feels when she's back home with her family. I say that this movie gives just enough of a satisfying conclusion to the character of Black Widow. But throughout the MCU, I did feel like they gave me a complete character development of who Black Widow is thanks to this movie. And now it's time to go back and see the rest of the negative reviews that were out that I haven't read yet. Black Widow, much like The Family at its core, is a messy affair. Although the action sequences are entertaining, the awkward dramatic beats hinder the overall flow of the film. I disagree with that. I think that some of the dramatic moments in here are some of the best parts of the film, and the action scenes are not necessarily up to par with some of the action in like Winter Soldier or Infinity War or in Endgame. I mean, the action's good, it's just that it wasn't as awesome as I was anticipating or as I thought it would have been. Black Widow isn't much of an action movie. It exists mostly to fill the narrative gap between Captain America Civil War and Avengers Infinity War. It's ultimately disappointing how much of Black Widow is, in its comparatively limited way, just more of the same. a sidebar to the overall Marvel project rather than an essential part of it. A mixture of spy story and superhero movie that, despite the charisma and chemistry of both Johansson and Pugh, comes across as less than the sum of its parts. Again, I don't think that this movie was mostly created just for the sake of creating another movie or to get some continuity of what happened to Black Widow when she left the Avengers after Civil War. I will admit, it does seem like the movie is more interested in the family's character arcs rather than focusing on what's going on with Black Widow, but I felt like that we had all of these other movies to give us the understanding of who Natasha is and what she's like. That way we could be able to emotionally connect to her and not have a lot more deeper analysis of what she's like. I think the problem is that this movie didn't necessarily give a lot more detail of what she did like when she was back at her hometown. Take out all the mindless bickering, pointless fight scenes, cutesy-poo Avengers references, and tie-ins to future Disney Plus TV series, and you're left with maybe 75 to 80 minutes of actual movie. If the film delivered better action thrills or emotional oomph, I wouldn't care to nitpick about such things, but the mind starts to wonder when it's underwhelmed. The pieces are great, but the execution leaves plenty to be desired. The film isn't likely to go down in Marvel history as much more than a footnote, nor does it tell us much about the studio's envisaged next phase. This movie is not supposed to go ahead and be an advanced placement to what Phase 4 is supposed to act like. I mean, it's supposed to set up, like, what Florence Pugh's character is supposed to be eventually in the future, but it's not intentional to be a Phase 4 movie. It's kind of more like, a Phase 3 movie with what happened to Black Widow in between Civil War and Infinity War. And the other thing is that Marvel always gets targeted as being just a boring movie, like, oh, we haven't seen that before. I mean, movies get recycled plenty, and when it comes to a Marvel film, it's like, it's just nothing. I get it that it's formulaic, but the formula can work because it's a good formula. If movies like John Wick or Inside Out get critical praise and say that they are fantastic films to watch, why can't a Marvel film have that same kind of treatment? Why does it have to be in the category of just as the comedy scenes aren't funny, the action scenes are thrilling? Natasha never seems as if she's in any danger. She never seems like she's having fun either. Pugh and Harbor are a delight in the midst of a film that is nothing more than ordinary and yet another typical superhero film. Sadly, quickly degenerates into a maddening mess of unnecessary scenes, mildly well choreographed action, and a comic book megalomania that is actually completely out of place here. Especially as relates to its genre-specific weakness, Black Widow is all too familiar. I get it when a Marvel movie is like just trying to be a Marvel movie, like they're self-aware of their formula, like they're saying, oh, we're Marvel, so we have to be funny. We're Marvel, so we have to go God mode whenever we have an action scene, they're gonna get out okay. And this movie does that. I think that's why I wasn't necessarily into the action as much as I thought I was compared to something like Captain America the Winter Soldier. I think it's more so of how the camera angles are like or how the situations are like with what they're in. When a movie becomes self-aware and it tries hard like that, I get it. I get why people don't necessarily find it to be that appealing. I wouldn't necessarily call it garbage because it's made in a universe that's meant to be taken in as fiction. You're there to enjoy the ride no matter how ridiculous it gets. And that's all of the negative reviews that I am seeing on this website. I'm pretty sure that there are going to be more that will be posted on here, but that's all that I am able to read for now. But what do you guys think of Black Widow? Do you actually agree with the negative reviews that are shown on this list, or do you disagree with them? Did you actually enjoy the movie? Put down your thoughts down in the comment section below, and let's have a conversation about it. And like this video if you agree with what I say, or dislike this video if you disagree with what I say. I don't mind the dislikes. So that is it I have for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be sure to see you in the next video.